You always wonder heading into a week. We say it all the time. What are we going to talk about, especially on a week when there isn't the pay-per-view? But then on Tuesday, the news came out that current Ring of Honor World Tag Team Champion Jay Briscoe, a part of the Briscoe brothers, passed away in a car accident. From all reports, it seems that another truck, similar to the one he was driving with his daughters, passed the center lane, caused the accident, and I believe both drivers passed away, including Jay Briscoe. And his daughters are currently in the hospital, both alive, and his wife was not in the car at all, as was first reported. It's interesting because of the fact, Jay Briscoe and the Briscoe brothers in general, they are one of those teams and individually that they kind of transcended what it means to make a life in pro wrestling without going to the major companies. We saw that more recently in the last couple of years with the Kenny Omegas, obviously Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks and stuff like that. But the Briscoes, and it's crazy to think because he passed away at 38 years old. So it shows you that they were in Ring of Honor and they were in at 17, 18 years old. They got in early.
Yeah, they were involved in the business in a Ring of Honor for many, many years.
I think 20 years.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, when I heard the news, I texted you, I was like, no freaking way. This can't be true. And unfortunately, obviously, it unfortunately was true. And all reports were, like you said, it was an accident. It was either he was going to or coming from his daughter's cheerleading competition. He was very devoted. He was a very devoted family man with his daughters. His daughters were both cheerleaders. And at this point, I did see that they're both okay, but they are undergoing surgeries. Obviously, they're in the hospital recovering, so we obviously wish them all the best. And it's just a sad situation. I feel for the family. And obviously you feel for everybody that's been been in a ring with him and just gotten to know him. He was always about family first. That was the biggest thing with him. He was true to himself. That's how he was. I mean, one of his theme songs, Lynyrd Skynyrd, him and his brother, they have transcended the business. They've made a great living, not even in the quote unquote big leagues, but everybody in wrestling has a lot of respect for them. I saw Usos, I saw Seth Rollins. I mean, I could go on and on about the number of people.
And that's kind of how you know. So I've seen it before where there's been people who've never been in WWE, but a lot of times, and get acknowledged by WWE and never been in WWE, but a lot of times that is because they came before WWE was an option. Maybe they were big in the 70s, maybe they were big in the 80s and in Japan or other places, and it just never really happened. Maybe WWE wasn't as big then, or they were too old when WWE started taking off. But the Briscoes, to be fair, their entire career was without being in WWE while WWE was there. So this isn't they passed away, but, before, they made it before WrestleMania, like I said, honoring the people of, the gorgeous Georges of the world and people who kind of came before the current day. Or, just happen to miss paths. Maybe they had, I think Carlos Colon, a good example, right? He's a huge name in Puerto Rico and he carries some controversy as well, but he never really made it in WWE because a lot of his career was 70s and 80s. And by the time the WWE started to take off, he was kind of too late. He was in his late 40s. I think he was in the Royal Rumble, one of the early 90s Royal Rumbles he appeared in at 45, 50 years old. So, he just kind of missed it. But the Briscoes were in their prime while WWE was a viable option, while essentially Impact Wrestling was a viable option. And yes, they've had their cup of tea in Impact Wrestling. They even won, I think, the Impact Wrestling Tag Team Championships pretty recently. Yeah. But were never considered to be Impact talent. They weren't like Samoa Joe or AJ Styles. They weren't there.
Impact originals. So
they obviously had a cup of tea here and there in Impact, but they were never, somebody whom you could buy their T-shirts. And same with, WWE. They never made it in WWE.
Isn't that one of the biggest what ifs? Would they have ever made it to not? I should say made it because they made it very far in the business, but. You think they would have ever came to WWE? I feel like they were happy with what they were doing. They were making a very comfortable living. I mean, does it really matter?
And I know that they carry, some controversy with them from some remarks that were made many years ago. But this is not by no means a New Jack situation. New Jack was one of those kind of people who, under no circumstances, I could ever see him going. It was just. he was okay that he was never going to WWE, I hope, because that was just not an option. Like, New Jack was not WWE material. And I don't know if some of the controversial comments essentially were what kept the Briscoes out of the big time. But I guess the difference is when they passed away. New Jack, when he passed away, WWE acknowledged it, because obviously they own the ECW library and New Jack was a big deal then. But I don't think that the wrestling world acknowledged it the same way. It was more like, boy, New Jack passed away. There'll never be anybody like him again. But, not so somber, I guess, is the best way. Be like, it's a shame. You don't want to see anyone pass away in the wrestling world. But it was one of those, he was never, it was never a what if. Because he was never going to WWE.
No.
These guys were friends with everybody in the current business.
Yeah,
these guys were not in WWE, but they were. New Jack wasn't, in current contact with Seth Rollins and the Young Bucks. He wasn't, friends with those guys. He wasn't hanging out with those guys on a current basis. The Briscoes and Jay Briscoe were doing that.
And here's the problem that I had with, obviously the comments were not great comments. We've talked about it in the past, so we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. But here's the thing. The biggest thing is they made amends. They did what they had to do. So that should have been it. It
wasn't enough though. Like with the New Jacks of the world, what he did kept him out of WWE. Clearly, it made it like he wasn't in AEW either. You know what I mean? Or Ring of Honor either. So like these guys were good enough that they were still somebody who was hireable. These guys weren't making a business for themselves in another country where no one wanted them. They were still a viable American option. They never had to leave the United States. And whether they weren't working for WWE, they were working for Ring of Honor. And when Ring of Honor got bought out by Tony Khan, they were an integral part of the current Ring of Honor. And whether they were featured on AEW because of those comments, I think because they were only a Ring of Honor talent, Tony Khan didn't go to bat for them because, why essentially go to bat for these guys who were not going to be here full time anyways. But, I think if it was, when he bought Ring of Honor, for example, and they were an integral part of Ring of Honor, if they somehow were told to not be a part of Ring of Honor, he might, because they were going to be an integral part of Ring of Honor, he might have gone to bat for them for that product. Because they were going to be a big deal in that product. Because, it was only going to be a one-off appearance maybe on AEW. And Warner Media said, listen, we don't want him on TV. And you're like, listen, all right, like let's say Raw 30 coming up, right? Ric Flair or Hulk Hogan or these people might come back for a one-off appearance. Not for a big storyline, but just to come and wave their hand, say goodbye.
Yeah,
so if USA Network said we don't want Hulk Hogan coming out, they'd say, okay, that's fine. Because they're not investing in Hulk. He's just coming off for a one-night only thing.
That's it.
So, if the Briscoes were just coming out for a 5-minute segment, it's not really worth causing, ruffling any feathers for a 5-minute segment. Now, if he sought them to start a big long storyline with the AEW tag belt and be a full-time competitor, yeah, obviously he would. And that's what he saw them doing with Ring of Honor, is being full-time competitors and being a big name, essentially, being one of the bigger names that was going to lead that brand into the future.
Yeah, I mean, they were going to lead the brand into the future. And here's the crazy parallel with Jay Briscoe and Brody Lee. Their final matches before their passing was a dog collar match. How interesting is that? That kind of gives you like the chill bumps. It's and I saw it on Twitter. Someone made that comment. I'm like, oh my God, I totally forgot about that. And and they both were way young. They both should be still wrestling today. And it's just, the whole situation's tragic. Just everything that was played out. That everything that had happened. It's a somber day and somber stretch here. And I gotta give WWE credit. Like Vic Joseph, great job on NXT. Like acknowledging it, and also there were. Of course, the timing, you can't plan these things, but there was going to be some sort of like funeral or something for
the New Day. They were involved in a funeral segment
with Pretty Deadly. And obviously in good taste, they heard what happened and they scrapped the whole thing. And then obviously Shawn Michaels and company said, all right, Vic, let's acknowledge Jay and we'll
and that kind of shows, obviously, too, because yes, they made a life for themselves outside of WWE, but they were such a big name that they were still known. They never were in WWE. Essentially, they never were in AEW. They never were in Impact Wrestling. But they were a big enough name that every one of those companies wanted to make a point on their broadcast. Hey, this person or this guy and this tag team was never employees of ours, but everyone knows them and they're such an influence that we are going to acknowledge them on our brand. Even though, again, never, I mean, I guess technically an AEW employee, but never a WWE employee in any facet, right? Other than maybe a dark match back in like the early 2000s, on a WWE Jacked or Metal episode. But yeah, never an employee of the company.
No.
And yet, they still, and Triple H obviously, felt compelled to acknowledge it. And like I was kind of, leading off, they defined what it was in the United States. Because again, Japan's another option. Japan is a whole different animal, though. But to make it in America, you essentially got to be in WWE. So to have a 20-year career in the United States of America, where you travel the whole country, where you make a living being a professional wrestler and being somebody who sells a T-shirt and is a well-known wrestler, where WWE knows who you are, and Impact and AEW, everyone knows who you are, that you exist and acknowledges you, and have a 20-year career, but to never be in one of those major companies, they were one, if not the definition of that.
Yeah, and I think, to go back to the point of, family's everything for the Briscoes. That's just the fact of life. I mean, I don't know if you saw the video. Like there was like a really it was like a moment where he was being dad, and there was a moment where he was helping his daughter with the cheerleading routine like that. That shows you that yes, he's a rough and tough guy, in the squared circle. But when you get him outside the ring, he's he's like the nicest person you ever meet. And the other part of it too is because of that family that family bond that he always put his family first. That's just everything that I've seen, everything that I've heard about the Briscoes. It's all about family. And here's the thing: maybe they never wanted to go to WWE because they knew of the rigorous schedule the toll that it could take on their family. And I think
you also wonder too. I mean, they were a unique. Let's be real. They were a pretty, not WWE friendly kind of, and they made a name for themselves. I don't want to say like, extreme, barbed wire death matches, but they were definitely, kind of rough and tumble. They were, somebody, and I'm not saying that WWE couldn't have done something to them, but I don't know that they would have had a long-term viability. They would have had to gentrify them a little bit. I don't
agree with that. I think if they decided they wanted to come to WWE, they would have been at the top of the food chain. That's just how good they were.
But you think the way that they were, you don't think WWE would have tried to gentrify them in any sort of way?
I don't. If they did, it'd be so minor because I feel like the Briscoes want to be more. They want to be more like themselves. And usually the best wrestlers and the best characters are the ones that you're kind of rubbing, reality to not reality. You're showing off on a television show where it's scripted, but you're also infusing you as a real person. So to me, I think the Briscoes had enough power and enough stroke, I would say, that they would be able to control things to a good extent. I don't think it would be to the extent of Bray Wyatt, but I mean, the Bray Wyatt's kind of a unique situation. But the Briscoes definitely would have said, if I'm coming to WWE, this is what I want. And guess what? They would not be afraid to, if WWE, said, we can do this, this, and this, but we can't do this. I bet you the Briscoes are saying, fine, we're making a good living in Ring of Honor. We don't care.
The one shame is, obviously, that they never made it in WWE is the fact that they'll never get that acknowledged. I mean, maybe they will. I don't know. WWE acknowledges Drew Carey in their WWE Hall of Fame, so you never really know. But I feel like that would be, like, for example, Sting is in the WWE Hall of Fame. Obviously, he was in the WWE for 5 seconds, and most of his Hall of Fame is from his WCW days, which is owned by WWE. Yep. But Ring of Honor has no affiliation with WWE, so it's not under their umbrella at all, right? And same with Impact Wrestling, not under their umbrella. So there's really, other than just wanting to acknowledge everyone and anyone and just try to really make yourself out to be the monopoly of wrestling, there would be really no basis for them to be honored, let's say, in the WWE Hall of Fame, because they have no ties other than obviously friends with the wrestlers in the back, but none of their in-ring stuff. I mean, obviously WWE does that, like a Heritage Award, where it's like they put you in the Hall of Fame, but they don't acknowledge, they just pass over like a list of names really quick, and they're like, and here's our Heritage nominees, or our Lineage nominees, Legacy Award, I think it is, and they just so maybe they'll throw them in there.
Possible. Let me ask you this though. Yeah. This is definitely in the background because there's, the other stuff is definitely in the forefront.
Talk about where Mark Briscoe goes from here.
Yeah. What's next? What's next for Mark? And obviously for now, I don't see him wrestling for a while. I understand.
There's definitely the grieving process and dealing with all of that. But when it comes to the long term and talking about the future for him, it is very difficult because of the fact Yes, they've had their singles competitions here and there, but they're a tag team, and they're a tag team by every definition of the word.
Yes.
They're the Briscoe brothers for a reason. Every time I've even mentioned the passing of Jay Briscoe in this, I've mentioned them like as a tag team, as if they both passed away.
As a unit, yeah.
So, it's not just difficult to lose your brother or lose a sibling or anything like that, but to be, you are, you're a team, you're a unit. This is like a band. This is like, a half of a band that was all considered to be an integral part. You know what I mean? This is Paul Stanley passing away with Kiss. Yes, you still have Gene Simmons, but I feel like you're really a unit.
Here's my thing too. Like, obviously, like I've dealt with that myself, losing my brother last year. So that I can relate to Mark Briscoe in that sense more than a lot of people can, because that's happened in the last year for me. So the first thing, he just needs to grieve. He needs to take his time. He just needs to process it and then, go from there. And I would not be surprised if he just hangs it up. He might.
Yeah, because again, it's difficult because obviously I don't see him doing tag team wrestling ever again.
And think of it of another example. And this is the big example. Like one of the greatest rock bands of all time, Led Zeppelin. When they lost one of their members, they just shut things down. They're like, well, we're not a whole. Our unit is not together. Guess what? We're done. And that happened. That was with the late John Bonham. Once he passed, that was it. I could see that with Mark Briscoe. I could think
maybe we'll see Briscoe Brothers 2000. I think we saw that with LOD. And remember LOD, or what was it? LOD when they had Heidenreich.
Yeah.
And like an Animal after the passing of Hawk and stuff like that. So like maybe somebody kind of comes in and like fills in and they do like a Briscoe Brothers kind of like, not a reunion, but like a, Briscoe Brothers 2.0 or something like that.
I'll be honest with you. I know it's obviously everything just happened, so it's so fresh. I would not, my thoughts are, I don't think Mark Briscoe, I don't think he's even going to wrestle for a while, if he does ever again.
Yeah, and I think he's the older of the brothers anyways, right? So he's closer to 40.
Is he? I thought Jay was older.
Okay, maybe. Well, I mean, if that's the case, I'll have to look it up real quick. They've been in the business for 20 years.
Yeah,
so,
I want to say Jay's the older of the two, but I could be wrong. I know they're not that far apart in age. They're a few years apart. Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, they're both 38. So they're both 38, but they're just about 9 months apart. So
yeah, they're like the definition of they're a year apart.
A year apart.
Yeah, they're the definition.
Oh, gotcha. So no, Mark is the older one.
Go back to the previous page.
Mark is the older one.
Oh my God. Look at how crazy that is. I came in like Jay passed away on January 17th. And
Mark's birthday was the other day. He just turned 38. So he is the younger one. So when they got in the business, Jay was 18 and Mark must have been 17.
Well, here's the thing. That's crazy. Like
because Jay is about to be 39.
His birthday, he just celebrated his birthday, this week, and it was
yesterday.
It was the day after his brother's passing. I can't even imagine that stretch. That's just
so he just turned
tough.
38, and Jay was about to be 39 in about a week.
Yeah, the whole situation's just it's just so unfortunate. Obviously we just we send our thoughts and prayers to the family. Obviously, that's the forefront.
Speaking
of
of somebody who made a business outside of WWE, and again, he's probably had more cups of tea in the big time, but a guy who took on Claudio Gastinoli in a Ring of Honor World Championship match this week as part of the tribute show that aired after Rampage, that'll be on YouTube, which is a Ring of Honor specific tribute show. So they had Dynamite, then they had Rampage, then they had an hour plus probably tribute show. Good thing it was on the West Coast, but I mean, AEW knows how to make like 5-hour TV shows. I don't know if you've ever gone to an AEW show, but they are not one of those kind of people that just tries to wrap it up. They are fine with keeping you there all night, which I guess to some people is great, but with the dark tapings before, with the 2-hour show, with the 1-hour Rampage taping, and then after all of that, they had like another 6 matches for this Ring of Honor. So essentially, if you went to AEW Dynamite taping this week, you saw like 25 matches.
Yeah, it's
maybe even more.
That's a big card.
The main event of that tribute show was Claudio Gastinoli against Christopher Daniels. And Christopher Daniels is kind of, if you're going to talk about somebody who's made a living, without being in the big companies, I mean, that would be somebody to talk about. But I do say that Christopher Daniels did have a few more cups of coffee in WCW. Obviously, he wasn't Impact original guy.
I
He's
mean,
had more time on AEW TV, New Japan.
Speaking of Daniels, think of a guy that he's been tagged up with, Frankie Kazarian. Kazarian had a cup of coffee in the WWE, and he's made a pretty darn good career outside of the WWE career.
But again, nobody has really, because again, these people had cups of coffee in WCW, Impact, or more stays in Impact. Outside of a cup of coffee in Impact, and I know they won the tag team titles more recently, while Impact was not obviously the TNA Impact that we're familiar with. It's the more recent Impact where, they do a lot of shows, WrestleMania weekend or something like that. That version of Impact is where they won the tag belts. But, other than that, the Briscoes, like I said, no time, they were never selling t-shirts in WCW, never selling t-shirts in Impact, never selling t-shirts in AEW, never selling t-shirts in WWE. So essentially they were never full-time employees of any of those companies, and they've made a living out of.
And I'm just gonna put it out there: greatest tag team to never step in the WWE light.
Could very well be.